Hi, this is Regina Y. Favors with a Favors Mentoring School topic. And so the topic is cultivate your own signature or cultivate your signature. And the reason why I think this is a very important topic to consider and discuss even further is because many people are operating with somewhat of a mimicry, copy based, cut and copy based or cut, copy, and paste, or they're sort of operating in a generic way of doing things and not cultivating their own signature. You have a signature in the same way that I tell my students, my English students, I teach first year composition, and I tell them that by a certain paper or just by a certain reading summary that they have composed, I can just about tell what their signature is, their writing signature is. I can sort of almost hear them talk it. And so, if there's any instance of plagiarism or copying without attribution, I can easily detect that because I have read their papers. I have talked to them personally. I sort of know them, not completely, but enough to be able to assess their work and say, hey, you need to make sure that you add quotation marks around this because these are not your words. In the same way that the words you are taking without attributing them to the proper source, appropriate source, is recognizable because again everyone has their own writing signature. So there are certain ways that we talk and write and do and behave, and it comes out in expression in different ways, especially through writing. And so if you are quoting, for example, in a paper, or you're supposed to be quoting, for example, in a paper, and I read words within that paragraph that you are composing, and I can look at the difference between your words in that paragraph, how you set up what should have quotation marks around it, and the actual quote itself, because the person who wrote the paper or the person who wrote the journal article or the source that you are using, they too have their own signature. So I want to talk about this because, we are in this age of everyone trying to get somewhere very quickly. And maybe we have always been in that way. There have been recent accounts lately of people going down for fraud. They have this sort of belief system, character based belief system to fake it until you make it. And so we have some recent reports of, say, like Elizabeth Holmes, other types of individuals who have been accused of fraud, charged. I think there's a lady named Charlie Javis who sort of conned JP Morgan Chase out of $175 million, because she didn't quite have the audience that she proposed or said that she had, right? Or attributed, right? That she had. And so we've been having these a lot of these con artists at the very highest level. But when you have to be a con, when you have to be a fraud, when you have to be generic, when you have to be something other than what your gifts and talents are, that is suggesting that you don't know what your signature is, because your signature requires you to take the time out for study. I've always made this point that become a student of what you later want to master. And so you cannot skip steps and think that you're going to be able to accomplish this big great thing and have the notoriety, and not sit down and become a student and learn and take a pen and pad and write, and not bear the consequences later. Elizabeth Holmes, with the Theranos debacle, is now going to prison because she dropped out of Stanford. She was supposed to be a pre-med student, I think, and then she said that she didn't like needles, and so she went into, I think, chemical engineering. And so then she stayed there to her sophomore year and came up with this ideal about the one drop, and that you can process medical diagnostics from that one drop. And then she decided to drop out. She got one of her professors to be, I guess, an investor. And then after that, she got big names. So she was sort of substituting the knowledge that she needed to have in order to make a case for the one drop. It's possible that it could have worked, but she commercialized it. Has she, say, for instance, created a research based organization where she received grants and she developed the hypotheses as a one drop, and then she conducted tests and research and wrote papers, articles, um, um, sort of reporting results, and she did a number of things to sort of lay out the foundation of what she was trying to become as a chemical research person or whatever. No, she skipped all of those learning steps. She skipped all of those learning steps, and she skipped ahead, dropped out, and she just decided to get bigger names and then also investors based upon those bigger names. And that substituted for the work ethic that she needed to develop, or she didn't develop, right? And so she didn't have a chance to cultivate her signature, because when you look at some of the interviews and the interviewer is asking her some questions, she sort of deflects into some emotional appeal on the subject. That, say, for instance, if the interviewer is asking about what exactly problem does it solve, or something like that, she'll get into this emotional appeal, and that no one should have a problem with um, no one should be able to struggle with needles, and this is a way that I can bring about change and help, or something like that. Well, another interview that I thought was very interesting that I never took note of, but I've been watching many YouTube videos on this topic, is Meghan Markle. And Meghan Markle has go-to statements, points by points. She will talk about her trip to Rwanda based upon her UN association. She would talk about what she did with Suits, her her previous online website, the TIG. There's a number of things that she will talk about, a point by point, but then in another breath, she will complain that she didn't have the training, or she didn't have the information about how to become a royal. She would later say in the Oprah interview that there was no training about how to curtsy, or there was no training about royal protocol, or there was no one pulled her over to the side and told her what she needed to do, or something like. Okay, so then that means that you didn't prepare for the role of becoming a royal. You wanted to be married, and you wanted to marry Prince Harry, but you didn't really understand what world you were moving yourself into, and you got swept up by the audaciousness of it, the enthusiasm of it, somewhat hastiness of it, and you didn't learn what you needed to learn to become what it is that you want to become. And so then once you get over there in that country, and you are bombarded by questions, or you are bombarded by skepticism, criticism, or something like that. And she's one of the people who have said in multiple interviews that if you can give it 5 minutes, give it 5 years, but she barely stayed over there less than 5 years. And so when she's asked about particular questions concerning her Rwandan trip, she will talk about how she met with the women of parliament, and she will quote off some statistics about the women filling 64% of the roles in parliament in Rwanda, and that's an amazing success. But she doesn't talk about the history of the country, what's going on, what are the prevailing problems, what are the consistent, persistent types of issues. She doesn't focus on a particular type of issue to solve. One of the YouTube uh, videos I was watching contrasted her with Kate, and I don't necessarily like those because there's a little bit of bias. But the interviewer sort of suggested through Kate's interviewing what her project is. Her project is about child development from infant to 5 years old. Okay, that is a focus. It's not just childhood as a general topic, but let's focus on the infant to the 5 year old. Get them where they need to be cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, spiritually, right? And then she could pass the baton to the next person, which would likely be the teacher or any other type of person who would be in a more educational role. So that's the focus. Again, that's not to be biased between these two women. It's just to show you that usually when you cultivate your signature, you are focusing on a particular problem that you want to solve. That means you also need to discover what your gifts and talents are. This is something that I push in college a lot of times. People love to say, that you not everybody needs to go to college, right? Well, remember your knowledge base is everything that is at your home, what you learn at your home, all the way up to high school graduation. So, and that's 17, 18 years old. So then where are you going to take yourself? For the people who say you don't need college, they still understand that you need something to move you out of a high school mentality into a grown up understanding of life. So even if you don't go to college per se, a university, 2 year college or 4 year university, you know you would have to you would have to sit for education and complete education beyond your high school years. Otherwise, you're going to stay stuck on a hamster's wheel. So you may go the vocational route. To me, that's still college because it's post high school learning. It's post high school trying to figure out who I'm going to become, and I need to add more to my knowledge base so that I can manage myself as an adult, right? But I say college is for everybody because all it is that you are putting yourself in an environment for study, analysis, development, wisdom, instruction, understanding. Every time you receive an assignment, you learn about that assignment, you research that assignment, and then you begin to apply the concepts of that assignment using the instructions as a guide, and then you turn in that assignment. The teacher will grade the assignment, and then the teacher will give you feedback. They can be both positive. It can be positive regardless, right? And so then you look at that feedback and you say where you need to change, where you need to grow, where you need to improve, or what you are doing very well. And so college is for everybody in that sense because all it is that you are taking your mind, your heart, your enthusiasm, your inclination to your propensity to be hasty and make hasty decisions, and putting you in a stable environment of learning, of developing, of growing, so that when you get to where you want to get to, you are not frustrated or annoyed because you've done the work. So cultivating your signature is something that is really getting me because I've been noticing a lot of singers, for example, coming up, and they are doing more covers than their own original work. And in some ways, this is a criticism because the person that you are covering, that person has done their work. They have cultivated their signature. You trying to copy that person and make it your own, it's not your own. It's not your own work. You're basically copying. You're basically mimicking, and you're mimicking the person. And the problem with that is that you're so busy developing in someone else's signature that you don't develop your own signature. And that's very, very, very important. That's why I take the time that I take with the books that I write, with the lessons that I create, the worksheets, the workbooks, things like that, because really no one knows my name. I'm not famous. I'm only instrumental as a teacher in the environment and the assignment that I'm in, and I cultivate that signature, both teaching and writing. And so the way I look at it is because no one knows my name, this is the best time to cultivate my signature, to work on myself, to get healing, to continue to write, to pray, to do what I need to do so that when it's time to go before great men, I'm ready. And so when you find people skipping and trying to get somewhere before the time, like trying to get somewhere before the time, they can't sustain themselves when they get there. That's why you see a lot of people who are one hit wonders, or you see a lot of up and coming rappers, and people and rappers trying to call themselves, copy the hip hop culture or what they think it is. They always end up resorting to some physical, sexual representation of it, and not the lyrical form that requires you to be able to write, to organize, to um, keep the rhythm, to learn the history. See, none of these people are learning the history of hip hop. There's hip hop and then there's rapping. And people think that they are interchangeable, but hip hop has its own history, has its own culture, has its own um, ethnicities and character, right? Whereas rapping is just trying to get the quickest buck. And let me throw out whatever the most mediocre song I can throw out to get what I can, so I can get people to run after this buzz sound or whatever that makes no sense at all. The lyrics make no sense at all. And then I'm going to throw a little bit of sexuality in it, sensuality in it. And then I got you. I've baited you. I've hooked you. I've switched on you. Right. Because then once I get the money, I'm not going to further cultivate or develop myself because I didn't start off in that way in the first place. So I just want you to really, really, really think about this, because copying someone else is not your signature. Covering someone else is not your signature. Cutting and copying and pasting from someone else who has done the work. They have years of work and they have done the work. That is not your signature. Every singer, I stay on the singer um, analogy, because every singer coming out of the 90s, maybe let's go all the way from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, some of the 2000s, they don't all sound alike. They do not, I cannot point to a singer during the 90s, Mary J. Blige or SWV or any of these other types of singers, or even rappers or R&B singers or even rock stars. I cannot point to one and say he sounds or she sounds or they sound like this person over here or this group over here. Okay, but today, when you look at the music on the scene today, everyone sounds alike. The videos are really, they're exactly the same. They're kind of like cookie cutter. And then they are adding sort of like sexuality to the mix, as if that's a punctuation in terms of it really having meaning. But it has no meaning at all, because when they were nobodies and no one knew their names, they didn't sit down to cultivate their signature. And that's, again, I can't stress that enough. Who you are matters just as much as where you are. And I can say the reverse: where you are matters just as much as who you are. So, for instance, if my assignment is teaching, right? I am assigned to teach and I also write. My gifts and talent, my gift is teaching because it's considered a spiritual gift. And then the talent is writing. Okay. So for the longest, I have been wanting to try to do anything and everything else because I thought it was going to bring me more money, or I thought it was going to bring me more meaning. And somehow I keep circling back to the teaching and writing. And I thought that was limiting. And I thought that that was not enough for me. But then somewhere in my development, and very late in my development, I got it. That it's limiting because it's supposed to be limiting, that I'm not supposed to be everywhere. I'm supposed to be somewhere. And that even with teaching, I've always wanted to teach at the university level, but you usually need a PhD, and I have my master's degree. And I thought, well, if I just could teach at the university, I know I'll be very important. No, I am needed at the community college level, because that's where I get to prepare people for transition. And it is also a place in my life uh, where I push this idea of 2 years of planning, because that's where I failed. So I didn't have a plan out of high school. So then I had to take just any old thing. And then even though college, I went on ahead and got back on track and got into college. I went to San Diego State University, and then I graduated, and I knew that I was going to teach, so it made sense to go on ahead and do the master's degree. But once I graduated with the master's degree, I didn't have a plan. And so being getting distracted with friendships and just other types of relationships uh, prevented me from taking the time to recognize truly my gifts and talents and cultivate them within that existing environment. So then once I got out of those environments, I had to catch up. Whatever I didn't learn in those environments, I had to catch up later when I did get a teaching job, when I did have to go through life's little setbacks. So it's important. When I was in college, that was the time to cultivate, to spend more time. So therefore now I have to kind of catch up from those times that I didn't spend the time I needed to where I am now. Now it hasn't been a hard thing because uh, I adapt extremely well and quickly. But I recognize in my teaching what I was missing when I was a student because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Sure, you can get A's, you can get very high grades, graduate with a high GPA, everything, but that doesn't always necessarily mean you know anything. And so, cultivating your signature thus requires you to know something, to become an expert in your field, to become knowledgeable about what is important for your audience. So, for my audience, my students are 2 year college students, 2 year community college students. And they are in that environment sometimes by choice and sometimes by default because they didn't plan. They are in that environment, and regardless of the reason why they are in that environment, they are in that environment as a transition tool to learn what they need to learn and then transition to the next level, which will be either a job or transfer to a university. So putting them in that mindset, understanding that they are in transition, is something that appeals to me, that I have experienced on my own, and that I can teach as a way for them to understand that they also need to cultivate their signature. So I'm going to just stop right here because I can go on with this, but keep this in mind when you are wanting to get into something, whatever the into something is, that it takes some time to develop in it. And if you are entering a field, you're not going to become the supervisor in 6 months, right? And if you do, if that happens, I don't know, it depends on how much experience you had prior to that. But it is very important that you learn what you need to learn where you are so it can prepare you for the next place. That's just in general. So cultivate your signature. Your gifts and talent deserve development. They deserve discovery, recognition, development, um, uh, progression, right? Because if you are pushing to get somewhere too fast, you are hindering and not developing somewhere else. And when you get to where you're going to get to, right? If you're not prepared for that level, it could crush you. You could collapse. Some levels are so high and require so much work ethic that if you did not build the work ethic where you are, if you don't build the work ethic where you are, you won't have anything to measure once you get to where you want to be. And so that's why you see people who kind of go down mentally, emotionally, psychologically, because the weight of that decision to be where they are now, they have no preparation in the past for it. And so, therefore, once they get there, they don't know how to navigate it. That's why you see people overspending and overspending to the point that they're broke, or overspending to the point of no vision, right? They just spending just because, right? Or they pull one of those types of statements, you don't know where I come from. Everyone has that kind of statement. Some bad, some good. But it's important that you understand that development is required for where you want to go, especially if you are called to a certain people or group or a person, or if you're on assignment somewhere. So this is Favors Mentoring School. Cultivate your signature. Visit um, reginayfavors.com for more tips. This is also available on Amazon. So amazon.com /author /Regina Y. Favors. Thank you very much for listening.